Good evening. Welcome to another episode of the Lantern's Quest. This is episode 22 of our series exploring a sketchbook of Christ as we're looking at the Gospel of Mark and considering what Mark can show us and teach us about this man, Jesus Christ. And this is the most important man that you would ever come to know. And so that's why this is a valuable um, study that we're going through. And I hope that you've been following along with us. And if you haven't, you can easily see the previous episodes just by going to the Bradford Christian College channel on YouTube. And they're all set up in playlists for you. So just find the Lantern's Quest playlist and you will find those previous episodes and you can get caught up with us in our study here. Um, as we regularly do, let me just remind you that the Lantern's Quest is sponsored by these groups: Wellsprings Church, David Barrett, the pastor there, and Reformation Bible Presbyterian Church, Pastor Lucas Baumbach, the pastor there. And there are links in the description so that you can visit those websites. You can see past sermons there. Encourage you to check those out. Become a regular follower of those churches. It is really a refreshing thing during even the middle of the week to just go check out a sermon from a strong, biblically based, Bible preaching church, as Wellsprings Church is and as Reformation Bible Presbyterian Church is. It can be a very refreshing way to spend an evening during the middle of the week as well. So um, follow and check out their sermons on a regular basis and be fed by their preaching as well. Even consider becoming one who attends those churches or be aware of what these churches are like and you can recommend them to others. Bradford Christian College, also a sponsor. Bradford Christian College, an online college offering a number of bachelor's degrees and a Master of Arts in Theological Studies. Again, a link in the description below. Check out that website, contact them for more information. A really nicely designed program where students are assigned a mentor who walks with them through their program, gives them opportunity to ask questions to further understand the material, be challenged by comments and questions from the mentor, and maybe see some further application of what is being learned in the program. And so it's a really nice design because it gives you that one-on-one interaction throughout the entirety of your program and can really facilitate your ability to complete the program to its conclusion. Also, Covenant Academy Online for grades 4 through 12, a number of live online classes, primarily helpful to homeschooling families. Gives a homeschooling family an opportunity for one of the higher subjects that might be a little more challenging for parents to have their students take that subject, like an advanced math or one of the higher science classes typically. Um, and also for parents that have a number of children, an opportunity for some of those children to be engaged in the online class so mom or dad can focus on some educational needs of the other children. And so Covenant Academy Online, link in the description below. Please contact me if you have questions about that and would want to maybe incorporate that into your homeschooling plan. All right. um, so as I said, we are at episode 22. Is that what I said? Episode 22 of
Can't remember the count.
they all blur together. It's episode 22. Yeah, I got that right. We're at episode 22 in our exploration of the what we're calling Sketchbook of Christ, the Gospel of Mark, and what it can show us about Christ. We're in Mark chapter 6, so I should have mentioned this earlier, but grab your Bible. Um, some would prefer that it be a King James Bible, but grab your Bible and let's.
A problem with that?
No, I don't
Could
have a problem with that. I just wanted to
could
make
be
note.
a Greek Bible as well.
Okay. Um, Others of us need something like the ESV that can we can understand. But um, Mark chapter 6. Have your Bible there. You can follow along with us, and we would love it for those who view our videos. If you have questions or comments, please enter those comments there with the video so that we can see those and benefit from those comments and maybe answer questions that you have. Um, while we try to talk confidently about the content that we're looking at, it doesn't mean that we know everything perfectly. And so we would love further clarification if one of our viewers has that for a particular portion of scripture. And we would certainly love to answer questions that those who view these videos might have. So don't hesitate to enter comments on these videos. All right. We are in Mark chapter 6, and it's actually been 2 weeks since we've been in Mark chapter 6. Last week we did our reaction time, which I'll just say, I guess it's kind of self-serving, but I enjoyed our last reaction time. I thought it was a pertinent topic, right? How contemporary Christianity is handling the scriptures and um, uh, what we should make of that and what we should really think about in regards to the scripture. I thought it was a very valuable discussion, and so I would encourage people to um, find that reaction time video and view it if you haven't viewed it.
And send us your reactions.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Okay, I'll quit wandering around and let's get to Mark chapter 6. And just to kind of orient us then, I think that's what I was getting at because it's been a couple of weeks since we've been in Mark chapter 6. So just to orient ourselves to what activity Mark is recording for us here in chapter 6, we started off with Jesus coming back to his hometown and the people there having a particular reaction, which is rejecting him essentially, and it's really crystallized there in verse 3, where it says that they took offense at him, and that characterizes the reaction of the people there in his hometown. And David, I think it was you that mentioned this, maybe both of you did when we were talking about that, but I think he never comes back to Nazareth after this event. I think so. That would seem to be pretty critical regarding that reaction. Then the section where Jesus sends out his 12 apostles and he gives them authority over unclean spirits. They are able to cast out demons. They heal the sick. They're doing the things that they've witnessed Jesus doing, which also includes preaching, right? They're proclaiming the gospel message where they go as well, and they have success in that endeavor. But that story is somewhat interrupted here, where we learn about the death of John the Baptist. In particular, what we learn is what King Herod is thinking about this Jesus, and he's decided that it's John the Baptist come back from the dead. And then Mark explains to us how it is that John the Baptist ended up being murdered. So we went through that story, and then we returned to the Jesus narrative, and I think this is the last thing we largely discussed, was Jesus feeding the 5,000. Now, this took place in that Bethsaida that is not the Bethsaida that's in Galilee. It's the Bethsaida that's in the Decapolis. And so on the map that we've used, those Bethsaidas are like right next to each other. It appears on the map. I don't know how close they really were to each other, but yeah, so there's this marvelous miracle of the feeding of the 5,000. And this miracle is going to come back up maybe a couple of times in the stories that follow. In particular, it'll come up immediately, reference to it at least, will come up immediately in this story of Jesus walking on the water. So let's start here at verse 45, And I'll read this section 45 through 52. Immediately, he, that is Jesus, made his disciples get into the boat and go before him to the other side, to Bethsaida. Now, this would be the Bethsaida in Galilee, while he dismissed the crowd. And after he had taken leave of them, he, that we're still talking about Jesus here, went up on the mountain to pray. And when evening came, the boat was out on the sea, and Jesus was alone on the land. And Jesus saw that they, the disciples, were making headway painfully, for the wind was against them. And about the fourth watch of the night, he came to them, walking on the sea. He meant to pass by them, but when they saw him walking on the sea, they thought it was a ghost and cried out, for they all saw him and were terrified. But immediately he spoke to them and said, "Take heart, it is I. Do not be afraid." And he got into the boat with them, and the wind ceased, and they were utterly astounded, for they did not understand about the loaves, but their hearts were hardened. Right? So we see at the end there that reference to the miracle that they just witnessed, and we'll have to, when we get there, we'll have to talk about what significance we see in that. But let's go back to the beginning of this section, and David, maybe we'll start with you. We read this interesting phrase, immediately Jesus made his disciples get into the boat. And it would seem that this follows right on the heels of the miracle of the feeding of the 5,000. What can we say about this verse 45?
Well, yeah, immediately is an expression Mark likes to use, and sometimes it's really significant. um, if we consider the various gospels speaking about this event of feeding the 5,000 and what followed right after it, we can gain from John's account, John chapter 6 and verse 15, what was going on as far as the atmosphere of the crowd and the people right after he had fed them. The people, it says in verse 14, this is indeed the prophet who is come into the world. And Jesus perceives their reaction there in verse 15, perceiving that they were about to come and take him by force. It's a really strong terminology there, to make him king. And Jesus withdrew again to the mountain by himself. And we're going to read in Mark that he goes up into the mountain alone to pray. But this is what was going on. And it's kind of like when his first miracles in Capernaum and the people came out, and they just came out again the next morning. They wanted to be there and they were growing because of the miracles. Jesus got away. Well, a similar thing's going on here, and he wants his disciples to immediately be separated from this. Possibly he saw in his disciples this catching the enthusiasm and of the atmosphere of the people. And he had a lot more to teach them. He had a lot more he needed to do. It was not the avenue by which he would become king. And so immediately he gets his disciples in the boat and sends them away without him to the other side, to Bethsaida. Um, I don't know. Do you want me to go on in that, or do you want me to pause at that point? Because there's a little bit of dispute, because John, I think it is, says that he sends them to Capernaum, and they do end up closer to Capernaum than Bethsaida. And that can be understood, because to Bethsaida could also just mean in that direction or by that way. It doesn't have to be a conflict in the scriptures. It's easily just letting you know you're headed west, okay? And go near Bethsaida or by way of Bethsaida to Capernaum.
Okay. Lucas, why don't you pick up from there? Anything you want to say about verse 45, and then maybe thinking about what we read there in verse 46 about what Jesus in particular does at this time?
Yeah, the just picking up the Bethsaida question, there's a few different prepositions here. There's to, which is not this word. This is one of the two prepositions, pros, which, if I'm remembering correctly, can mean up to, or sort of in that direction.
Right.
It doesn't necessarily mean it could be your final destination, and there may be something on the way. Um, and there are other words for to. Ace is into, so into the boat, and so there's other prepositions there that they're he's there's a few different twos going on here. So I think that's fine. It's not a big concern, especially when you have a harmony of the Gospels. You may get like different order of events. Like, for example, in John, you get the walking on the water, but you also get the feeding of the 5,000, but they're reversed. Here, the feeding of the 5,000 comes earlier in chapter 6, it comes later in chapter 6 of John. So is that, an incorrect telling of it? Not necessarily, just the way that they prioritized it. So it's not, these things are little details that are not useful to quibble over. What I like to do is I like to ask, what is the author trying to communicate? And maybe John thought it was, but surely he was aware, since he was the last of the authors of the Gospels, he was aware of what Mark had already said. So he wasn't trying to rewrite Mark. He had a particular message that he's trying to convey. And so what you need to focus on is what that particular author is trying to communicate. Because God does write scriptures, but he uses human agents, and all of their context, the kind of language that they use is particular to them. That God used these men to communicate. So we don't demean scripture and say it's not divine because it's written by men. It's that God wouldn't have given us four gospels if he was worried about there being differences in ways of telling the stories. So, but it's interesting. The King James in verse 45 says he constrained his disciples to get into the boat. So I think there's definitely some sort of sense of urgency. It's not just him telling them to. He's clearly going a different way. He's taking leave of them in verse 46. And so there's a purpose for what he's doing, keeping them busy. I did think it's illustrative, or it's helpful. It's enlightening what David said about was it John, where they say that they're going to take him by force, or Luke,
Yeah. John
John.
6,
and
15.
make him a king. Even though this isn't the first chapter of Mark where we see the temptation in the wilderness for 40 days, there is potentially continuing temptation. One of the commentaries I was looking at says that while the master was fighting um, his great fight on the summit of the mountain, his disciples were having a great fight in the middle of the sea. So that there's a sense in which yeah, they're going through a great storm in life, but he's also going through a great storm. Um, Remember, Jesus is sinless, but he's not beyond, as a man, he's not beyond being tempted from without, just like Adam in his sinless state was tempted from outside. And I think that's helpful for us to realize that Jesus was fully man. He was able to be tempted, but not by his sin nature, rather from outside forces. Hey, you could be king. We could, give you your glory now. And Jesus certainly was not interested in doing that at that time. He was looking for a greater glory, being seated at the right hand of the Father, not some sort of some minimalistic human dominion that was going to pit him against the Roman Empire. So yeah, that's easily a detail that can go lost because it doesn't really explain here in Mark. It doesn't say why he went up onto a mountain by himself. But it does say that he could see the disciples from wherever he was on top of the mountain. So it's an interesting thing. Either it wasn't very far. What was it? 10 miles across. So he could have been within eyesight of them. But there could be maybe a divine knowledge also in him being able to see that they were straining to row. He could see the disciples were straining to row. It's just remarkable detail.
Right.
Jesus is seeing it.
Right. We know that there was it Nathaniel that Jesus said, I saw you under the tree, but he wasn't physically, from what we can see, he wasn't physically close enough to see him. So that was that
Right.
spiritual insight or divine insight. And
Yeah, if you go to, I think it's Matthew, he says that they were several strata, is the term that of the version I'd used, out to sea when he saw them. A strata is, as I researched, it was an eighth of a mile. So there, I'd say they're at least a half mile out to sea or somewhere around there if you do several strata.
3/8 of a mile, I think, would be the minimum there.
But the beginnings of several, I think it'd be difficult at close to about half a mile or so to determine by just human vision that people are straining, except if you do see the storm going on and everything. So yeah, it could go either way, whether he saw it physically or, uh, as you're saying, like he was able to see Nathaniel under the tree. But I don't think we want to pass by verse 46 too fast.
I don't think we are passing by.
Okay.
We're
Feel
Go
free to
ahead and
rebuke my reading. Yeah.
Well, I didn't know if
no, that's
I
fine.
could have waited to see where you were headed next, but
I mean, with verse 46, I'll just mention, and then David, you can pick up from there, that here in Mark 6, here is another time where we encounter this being told that Jesus goes away to pray. I think it's maybe the third time we've encountered it by this point in Mark 6, but certainly the second time where we've read about Jesus going away to pray. And I think it's an interesting insight because people might have the impression that, oh, he's just some kind of super being that never tires or never needs to pray, and yet regularly we read about him going off to pray. So I think that's interesting insight regarding Christ himself.
yeah,
But David, go ahead
and
and take it
yeah,
from there.
that's what I wanted to make sure we touched on is that Jesus did pray and he did go away to pray at times. I believe, if my research is accurate, there are four recordings of the times that he went and away to pray. Three of those times are to a mountain, and one is just an isolated place. Um, the first is when he was going to choose his 12. He actually prayed all night. It says in Luke 6 that he went to the mountain to pray, and he prayed all night the day before he actually selected the 12. Um, then we have the one definitely in Mark of Capernaum, first miracles, like I mentioned, and the crowd had come at the Sabbath evening, and then the next morning they were there, and Jesus had gotten up before everybody and went to a isolated place to pray. And then, of course, we all know the Garden of Gethsemane, which was on a mountainside, and his prayer there. And we have this one. There may be others, but those are the four that I um, brought up. And each one is really when he's facing a major temptation, like Lucas was saying. Early in his ministry, he's got at least three of the four temptations. Early in his ministry, he's got the crowd of Capernaum in the palm of his hand. But that's not the avenue. He had other places he needed to go and to preach and to teach, and he had disciples to train. And so he separates himself and prays about it. Here, they could make him king. He, as Lucas pointed out, very strong when he dismissed that term is even strong of telling the crowd to go. He was very insistent about that and went up into the mountain to pray. Again, the temptation, as he pointed out, would have been there. And then certainly in the Garden of Gethsemane, when he's praying, if possible, this cup pass from me, but he wasn't going to succumb to that. It's your will, Father, that I will follow and not my own. It's your will be done. So, yeah. Um,
when he goes to pray before choosing the 12, I mean, this is obviously speculation. I just wonder how much of that prayer time was spent over Judas Iscariot, right? Like, you
you
know,
know, I,
just
I don't know. Yeah, that would be speculation. But
right.
certainly he viewed it as so serious that he didn't just like, pray a 5-minute prayer and then go make his choice. I mean, he probably mulled over the people and he maybe lifted each one up in prayer until he had a heartfelt assurance or something. I don't know.
Right.
But, people sometimes wonder, well, why should we pray? Well, first of all, the model of our life prayed. Okay. Um, Paul often will say, when he speaks about the character we should have in our relationships one to another and the humility, he says, like Jesus, and he even goes in Philippians, talks about the mind of Christ that we should have, that he humiliated himself and came down, um, leaving his place of glory. Um, yeah, how did he live his life? He was willing and needed to pray. We do too.
Yeah, I was going to say, I don't think it's out of place to say that Jesus needed to pray. And if he's,
We need to eat
without
food,
us,
drink water.
that's right. That's right. And if he's without a sinless nature and he needed to pray while he walked this earth, right? What does that say for us, right?
Yeah. Well, it's interesting, these prayer walks. And I do think, I think some people get into the idea, oh, I just pray in my prayer closet. Well, maybe that's not the only place you should pray. Maybe you should pray in public in your church, but also pray, do prayer walks and get out and walk. And we see Paul do the same thing. He sends in his ministry, and he probably got it from Jesus, but maybe this was a common thing, amongst the uh, more godly sort of priestly class. I don't know, but definitely he could get it from Christ, and he was encouraging us to use Christ as our example. So um, I would think that these walks are essential for our Master as the God man, fully man, and showing us his need to do these prayer walks and to commune with God, and take along. I think that's actually, I think we're going to talk about verse 48. Why did he intend to pass them by? I think what he's doing is he's headed. He told them to go over to the same direction, and this is what Paul does. He says, "I'll meet you in the next town. Like you guys go by ship, I'll go." But instead of going on land, Jesus is just going straight across the sea, and
Shortest distance between 2 points there, right?
yeah, and that's my interpretation of what's going on here. He intended to pass them by because uh, they were in the boat, and he was still on his prayer walk.
All right. Well, we're
I've got
not
another
quite
view
to
on that,
verse
but we'll wait
48.
till we
So,
get there.
sure. Hey, if we can have a little bit of controversy with some good,
Don't
healthy
want to
discussion,
pass
that's
verse
good.
46 by, that we
I
can go back
will
to
I
that if we
will
need to.
affirm Lucas's comment about prayer walks. I mean, Paul says to pray without ceasing. He often tells the churches he's writing to that you are always in my prayers. And I think some of it is we need to understand the intent and purpose of prayer. I think far too often because we often think of praying when we have a need, that we think the purpose of prayer is to make sure God hears our need so he can take care of us. And of course, Jesus said he knows your need before you even say it. There's a lot of different purposes to prayer, but certainly one of them, and I think would be what Jesus in particular would be after, is our mind needs to line up with God's mind. And it so often happens when we actually speak to God about the situation, and we meditate upon his word, expressing even his word to him, um, it brings us into alignment with the will of God. And Jesus always did the Father's will. Okay. And so I think that's one of the real significances of prayer, because sometimes it's just getting away from the clutter of life in order to focus upon what I do need to understand concerning whatever the situation is. You think about the Psalms and David, he complained a lot about his situation and so forth. But by the end of every Psalm, pretty much in which he's lamenting a situation, he comes to the point of God's going to take care of me. I can submit to his will. He's going to work this in my life and praise you, God. He comes into an alignment with the way he ought to be thinking uh, in reference to God and his situation.
Okay, let's move into verse 47 and maybe get into some of verse 48, maybe not all of verse 48 initially, but verse 47, just on the face of it, just seems to be a descriptor of here's the circumstance. But Lucas, why don't you pick up from there, and what do you see in 47 and into maybe the first part of 48?
Yeah, so the sun goes down and I think one of the commentaries said that there's a particular kind of wind, like a good kind of wind that comes at in the after or the evening, but in this case it was not a good wind. So they they were just stuck out there in the middle of the sea, probably not making headway, and you probably get a little panicked. I mean, I know I would. I'm not a big seafaring man myself, but I've been on small boats, I've been on some big boats, and it's scary. It's very disorienting, and Jesus seems, I think, because of the way that it words it, it looks like, well, Jesus is kind of off on his own, and maybe he doesn't, is not paying a whole lot of attention, but he is paying attention, and God is paying attention. I think that this is instructive. John does probably the best job in his gospel of pointing out the character and nature of God, but Mark does too here. Um, he doesn't make it's not a lot of fanfare like declaring Jesus to be God, as you see in almost every chapter of John, but here he just simply says he could see that they're straining and he cares. There's a compassion sort of built in to the character of Christ. He cares. He's paying attention even when you think he's off on his own doing his own God things. That he is intimately aware of his people, those who belong to him, and he's even aware of like the conditions of our life, like the nature of the wind, whether it's for you or against you, the winds of life, frequently against us when we're suffering. Christ is there. He's fully aware and he's caring for and watching over. He's being a good overseer here. He's ordained these men to be his followers, his disciples, but he is very careful, full of care for them. So, and it says about the fourth watch of the night. And I'm trying to, does anybody else have
Yeah,
uh,
I've got some stuff on
time for that?
on that.
Yeah.
The
So
if
from
they went out in the
sundown to,
evening and the sun down, you're probably talking sometime after what we would call our 6 o'clock hour.
mhm.
And the night watch was in divided into 3 hour segments. So when you get to the fourth watch, the first watch is the 6 to 9, second watch 9 to 12, third watch 12 to 3, the fourth watch is sometime between 3 and 6 in the morning.
Yeah, so this is quite a ways, quite a bit of time. is
Yeah.
passed when they're in this situation and they're in this condition. If I was walking on water, it'd probably take me a long time to get out there too. So, you know, um, but it's a big area that
But it also
they,
gives you an idea of how long they've been struggling too. I mean, they started sometime after 6 o'clock in the evening, and he's coming by sometime around 3 o'clock or so in the morning. I
yeah,
mean, they've struggled at least 6, 7, 8, 9 hours. And when it says there that they were making headway painfully, that word is like a really strong word about how difficult uh, it was. It means to strain, to toil, to torture. Um, they are they can hardly make any kind of headway, even with the greatest amount of effort out there on the waters. They've been by the time Jesus comes, they've been torturously attempting to go west um, for hours and hours. Um, so yeah, and I do think it also brings. I mean, there's analogous situations in terms of you talked about the storms of life or the winds of life that we face, and sometimes we think it's more than we could bear, that we're not going to get through it. Uh, Paul tells us that the promise is that he will never give us more than we can handle. Sometimes we think it's more than we can handle, but certainly in handling the situation we're able because of our reliance upon Jesus Christ and him to be there to carry us through. Um, this wasn't going to be allowed to go beyond what they could handle, but certainly they were stretched in this situation.
and they were awake. They were awake at the fourth watch. They saw him walking out there.
I don't think anybody could sleep torturously rowing, although some of them were probably quite exhausted, if
Yeah.
not all of them. And he comes walking on the sea, and it says he meant to pass by them. And Lucas gave one rendering, which I was not really that familiar with, um, that he's saying, guys, we're supposed to be headed this way. I'm not sure which direction he walked by them, but there are a few ideas about what does it mean, you know, he meant or intended to pass by them. Uh, the two that I came across, MacArthur takes one position, and that's um, to say that the expression is better translated. Um, he desired to come alongside them. Um, my, I'm not, a Greek expert or anything, um, but that didn't seem to really come out in my limited research. Sproul spends about a page or so in his commentary on this, and other study Bibles speak to this as reflective of the times that God passed by in the Old Testament. And when he did, they were times in which he manifest his glory. And that's what um, others have referred to. For example, this is the way the ESV puts it. He meant to pass by them. That's the quote that they're uh, referencing. Not so they would fail to see him, but so that they would see him pass by, walking on the water, thus giving visible evidence of his deity. So he was, they're saying that what it was is he intended to just manifest his glory by actually walking right by them on the water, and thus answering the question they asked after he stilled the sea, who then is this? The passage echoes the incident where God passed before Moses. The same verb that's used here occurs in the Septuagint in that reference in the Old Testament, giving a glimpse of his glory when he passed by Moses. But it also echoes Job 9, where Job says that it is God who trampled the waves of the sea, Job 9:8, which actually is using in the Septuagint the same words of Mark 6:48. And then it says in Job 9:11, he passes by me. So there's an implicit claim to divinity in Jesus' actions. So a lot of our different study Bibles, Sproul commentary, possibly others, seem to draw upon the act of God passing by and demonstrating his divinity. And that was what Jesus intended to do. Now, they cried out in such fear, it sounds like he went ahead and calmed their fears instead. They knew he was walking on the sea. He probably didn't need to pass by to show himself. I don't know. But anyway, that's kind of the angle I've taken as far as understanding it. It was a passing by like God did in times that he demonstrated his divinity, his power and glory.
But then there is the Fanny Crosby hymn, Pass Me Not, O Gentle Savior, where the refrain is to, while on others thou art calling, do not pass me by. So I'm not
Well,
sure how
that's a
that
different
works
kind of
into.
passing by. That's, don't count me among the reprobate. Bring me into the fold of the elect.
It's a beautiful hymn.
Yeah.
But right. I'll just note that in his commentary, Gill says, and would have passed by them. That is, he made as though he would.
Well,
By the course he steered, by the swiftness of his motion and his seeming negligence of them, it looked as though he intended to have gone by them and said nothing to them, though this was far from his real design.
well,
That's
Gill is just pointing out what you would have read in the King James, that he would have passed by them.
right.
Except that uh, the commentaries that I've looked at seem to suggest that this is just him demonstrating to them by coming close enough for them to see him that he was with them always, that they had nothing to fear of him being apart from them, that of course they mistook him for a spirit, which was probably not his intent. That they should have noticed. It's like you can see a person walking from very far away, and you can recognize them very quite easily, right, by their gait. Maybe walking on water makes you walk differently,
Might
but
change your gait. Yeah.
yeah, but still, I would say that that's probably a reasonable assumption that you should recognize Jesus. That doesn't always hold true. It's certainly not in the resurrection. They have a hard time
Yeah.
seeing who he is until he reveals himself to them. But I think in this case, it's safe to say pre-resurrection, there's nothing to say that he was transfigured or his image was changed at all. But I think that does make sense to me that a shepherd of his people is always nearby. That his presence alone should be comforting, and certainly that's what I would think. If I saw Jesus and wasn't, mistaking him for a ghost, I would say, well, Christ is always there. He's always there when I need him. And then of course, when they call out to him, he comes and he says, "Take heart, I'm right here." There's no reason to be afraid.
Right.
Just like a shepherd with the sheep. Like the sheep probably, they look at the wolf and they're terrified. They turn around, see the shepherd, and they feel safe. So, um,
Well, I think, we can't discount the fact that they've for hours have been laboring, probably beginning to wonder if they're going to survive. And still in the midst of waves and wind that keeps them from making hardly any headway, something comes walking on the water. I'm not surprised that they thought it was a ghost. I mean, it's not like you would have expected Jesus to come walking on the water. He was up in the mountain. I think that's one of the things Mark is making so clear just in that simple verse 47. They're at sea, he's on land. And that's what they knew too. It's not only, just setting it up, I think it's also depicting, the whole nature of it for these disciples. Jesus is on land. We're in a struggle. and we're in the struggle for our life, and no matter how hard we try, we're not making any headway. And now there's apparition is coming along the waters.
But
I
O ye of little faith, it was just a chapter ago, chapter 5, that Jesus calms the storm, and when they're crossing, so they're just crossing the other way. And
yeah.
if he can control, he's demonstrated that he's the has
No, I
mastery
agree.
over
I agree in
storms
what
and
you're saying.
creation.
The lesson there's to be learned. I think aren't we got to account for the fact the level of maturity in Christ of these disciples is still pretty low. And I would say a lot of Christians still get into the same panic mode, even though they've been Christians for some time.
I probably wouldn't even think it was a ghost. I would probably think I was just hallucinating at that point. So I credit them for actually acknowledging that there is something actually there. But if I can steer another direction, I'd like to go back to the beginning of verse 48, where it says, "And he saw," because one of the things that I've tried to be more attentive to in reading the scriptures is anytime the scriptures have an expression like this about God the Father or God the Son in particular, seeing, because I think it's, and Lucas, I think you touched on it because you talked about Jesus seeing and being moved with or being filled with compassion, right? Like a good
Hmm.
shepherd for his sheep. And I think that's so true. And we need to not miss that aspect because the God who sees takes you back to the Abraham and Isaac story, right? Because that's the name, literally the name that God reveals of himself is that he is the one who sees. And what did he see? He saw the need of um, a substitute for Isaac, right? And it's the ram whose head is caught in the thistles. I mean, there's so much picturing of Christ in that story that it's just an overabundance of imagery. But the God who sees the circumstance and takes action to provide what is needed. And another instance of the God who sees is when David sins by numbering the people when he wasn't supposed to. And now he's got to pick the judgment that's going to come. And when the angel of the Lord, which I take to be a Old Testament manifestation of Jesus Christ, is coming with the sword, we're told that God sees and stops the angel of the Lord. And what he sees is that very place where Christ will be crucified, and he sees that, and I just think it's just really a significant thing to always watch for where we are reading that God sees or Jesus sees and what that the fullness of that means for us.
Right.
That we have
There's
a God who
another.
sees. He's not a blind God. He's not a God of wood that has no eyes or he really does see and he really is moved or he moves to take action in that time, in that moment.
Yeah, there's a cross reference here to Genesis, and I'm not sure if it's pointing out God visiting Sarah in her barrenness, and that word visit literally means sees. He comes to see her, and that God sees where you are in your situation. That he comes in a sense as an overseer, as a shepherd. But an overseer is not just somebody who's like watching to make sure that you're disciplined correctly, but it's a caring parent that so yeah, that seeing is sort of pregnant with meaning, that he is vigilant, he's watchful, and what's really interesting is if you believe that about and he saw, and then you also look at the end of the verse, he meant to pass them by, you would say, well, why would he pass them by if they look like they were in trouble? Because it's not until he gets into the boat with him in verse 51 that the wind subsides, right? Um, so it's interesting. Does God allow you to go through difficult trials to test your faith? And I think it's a resounding yes. It's good for us to learn how to cry out. I mean, they could have been crying out not because there was a ghost, but they could have been crying out because, like, we're gonna die, just like in chapter 5. God, like, don't you see? Please help us. And I think that's appropriate when we cry out to God in our need. Um, and believing that He sees and hears our need. That's what David does many times in the Psalms. He cries out to God, God, hear my need, hear me. I know you're listening. Incline your ear to me. So believing that He does that, that He's good, and that He is there for us. He's just a moment away
Right.
from our disaster.
And just to kind of have a conclusion to that, and he saw, I think Jesus endeavored to instruct his disciples to see in the same way. And I take it from the story of the woman at the well. And when she left and goes back to the village, and the disciples come back from getting food for Jesus that he then didn't need, there's a moment where he says to his disciples, "Lift up your eyes and see, the fields are ripe for harvest." And I don't think he's talking about agriculture. I think what he's talking about is, see all these people who are coming from the village because of this woman who went back and told them what she had encountered. And he wants them to see these people as sheep who need a shepherd, who need to be cared for. And so I think that that's I don't know. It's maybe it's only significant to me because I'm reading what I'm reading into it, but I just think it's really significant. Anytime we're reading in scripture and we read about God seeing or Jesus seeing or the phrase lift up your eyes and see, I think that's it's it's a lot more than just the physical action of directing your eyes towards something. I think there's much more intended in that phraseology. But we'll leave that for whatever that's worth. And David, let's pick up here. He meant to pass them by, or meant to pass by them. I don't know if I read it incorrectly. It's given here, so I don't know if that changes the meaning
That's
or
your
anything, but
King James coming through.
he meant to pass by them. Uh, but when they saw him walking on the sea, they thought it was a ghost and cried out. So maybe let's, finish verse 48 and let's move into
Yeah.
49 and maybe some of 50 if you need to give
Well,
a
I would just, yeah, I'd bring in that again, and I'm not being just an apologist for these disciples, but it's 3 o'clock in the morning out on the sea.
Not for us on the sea. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, in
Yeah.
here. Well, it's
maybe
three
we should
o'clock
have done
somewhere,
this at 3 o'clock
but
in the morning to have a better sense.
and out on the sea, I mean, whatever light there is, it's moon or stars. If it's a storm, likely they're not shining. I mean, I can see in the desperation of trying to go forward in this boat in the middle of the dark, hardly able to see, and you see something, why they would cry out and think it was a ghost. And that cry out terminology there is to scream with terror, which they notice that they are terrified in the next
Yeah.
verse.
Yeah.
Um, and but if you want to go with the seeing here, Jesus saw their predicament and began moving toward how to aid them. They only could see in their predicament no aid at all, even when they saw him. And so, yeah, I mean, they needed to have their eyes open. I think it's not unusual for any of us to be in that type of a terrified state. I mean, just think about you, even as an adult walking in the dark outside, and something moves beside you, you jump, just because you're a little more terrified when you can't fully see what's going to happen next in the physical. Um,
Yeah, it's interesting. Just a little word study here. That word is anakrazo, which means to cry out, exclaim, or shout. I'm pretty sure that's where we get our word crazy. Like if you're crazy, it means you're screaming out like
well,
a
they probably were pretty much towards that state of mind. um,
It is unusual because kaleo is call out. Like if I call it like,
A
hey
calling,
there,
yeah.
come on, let's, come in here, come to the boat. It's it's like a terrified scream. Yeah.
But Jesus immediately, I mean, and this shows his compassion. I mean, when he got to that point and they had at least seen him, they hadn't fully recognized him, and they're terrified. He doesn't leave them in that terrified state. And he immediately speaks to them, take heart or be of good courage, or, take courage in you. And there it is translated, it is I, which is the absolute correct grammatical expression, not it is me. But that's not really what he said. Um, he said what he so often said when he was referencing something about himself that identified his divinity. He said, ego eimi, which is everywhere else translated, I am. Okay. Or they'll insert the he, but the he's not really there. It's he said, take courage, ego eimi, which is the Greek expression that is utilized in the Septuagint for back in Exodus when God gives his name, the I am, the I am. They utilize that expression. And I take it to be that Jesus was saying, the divine one, the one who is deity over all this, is here. Ego eimi. So do not be afraid.
There's some argument there for sure. It is I is probably the worst translation. Is this the ESV again? Okay. Um, yeah, to say ego is your ego, right? The Freudians picked this word up. Just means I. But to
Right.
say the pronoun with a me, you could just say a me like by itself and it means I am, right?
Right.
To just say ego, a me means I am, it is me myself. It is me myself. At the very least, this is how we were taught in seminary to translate these sorts of sayings that this is unusual should always be translated. It is me myself. It's me. But you definitely have to wonder, sort of in the back of your mind, whether this is Christ making a statement about his inherent being that, I am that I am, and remember how I am above my creation, so I have power over it. Don't be afraid of the wind, just like last time. I think there's definitely a an argument to be made. He says the same thing, I believe, to Pilate. Um, and or maybe a variation of this, which is meant to be uh, taken the same way that Jesus
Well, I
is
think
God
if,
Almighty.
yeah, I think if, I don't have these notes in front of me, but I think if you research the times he said I am, I think you'll find that there's a few times he doesn't use ego eimi, and it's usually because there's a contrast being made. He does another I am statement there, and one is dealing with kind of his current unglorified state, and the other would reference his glorified state when they're used together, and only one of them is ego eimi and one of them isn't. Um, but the so many I am statements of I am the door, I am the good shepherd, I am, they're all ego eimi. Whenever he's characterizing himself with one of those qualities that he has, uh, as our shepherd, as our savior, as the son of God, they have ego eimi in there.
Yeah.
Now, it doesn't mean it can't be used by somebody else. There are a few times where, mere mortals you do use that expression in a situation, but most of the time they don't use the ego eimi
Yeah,
expression.
there's a
Most of the
little
time Jesus does.
there's also a tiny little Markan sandwich there. If you read the Greek, you can see that it's a plural command for them to be of good cheer. Also a plural command. Y'all don't be afraid. Y'all be of good cheer. Y'all don't be afraid. These are literal commands, which doesn't really come through well, I don't think, in the English. But it's striking to see these one word commands We have to use two or three words to communicate the same thing. One word command on this side, one word command on that side, and then ego, me in the middle. Beautiful little Markan sandwich in the Greek. So it really stands out the way he speaks with such precision and concise language. It stands out for sure.
Okay, I just want to
And
point out that the King James translation is the same as the
yes,
ESV
it is.
translation. They
Yeah.
both say it is I.
Yeah.
So I just want to point that out in defense of no, I don't. Um, but I want to back up to this verse 49. And let's look at Gill's comment here of this. They supposed it had been a spirit. And he says, a phantom, a specter, an apparition, a nocturnal demon. And so he's suggesting they don't think it's anything good, right? In fact, in the next, and cried out, he writes, as men affrighted at the sight, fearing they should be hurt by it, or that it portended some evil to them. So as Gill reads this, um, he seems to be suggesting that the disciples were convinced that this isn't a good thing that we're seeing, and in fact, it may be a harbinger of some evil falling upon us.
Hmm.
That's
Yeah.
I feel that that seems to be a strong assertion of what is happening for the disciples in this moment.
Yeah. I think he's probably right. And I think any one of us at 3 o'clock in the morning, labored in the middle of the dark, feeling like we're struggling for our life, seeing some type of figure out there would probably think, well, this is it. This is the
Did
end of
you
it.
have some childhood experience at 3 o'clock in the morning that you
Well,
wrestled
Tim,
with still?
you remember at our grandparents when you had to go to the bathroom at night
Oh man,
and it
wasn't
was the
that scary?
outhouse that
That's
you had to
right.
go and you're out in nowhere's land. That was a dangerous trip,
It
or you
was.
felt
It
like it
was.
was.
But these are grown men, right?
No, I just can figure that is what it is, you know.
Yeah, I just thought that was strong description or of what was happening there in verse 49 that Gil had. And um I don't know that I've necessarily thought of it as, that
Yeah.
dark necessarily. But
And I
um
hadn't thought of that last terminology there, nocturnal demon, but just, a scary
um
apparition of some kind.
all right, so then again in verse 50, as I think both of you mentioned, we see kind of the fullness of, and he saw here in verse, so he truly saw their circumstance, right? And so when the time comes, he comes with these words of comfort, or maybe commands of comfort would be the way to say that, right? Commanding them to be of good cheer and be not afraid. Um, all right, so Lucas, maybe you want to pick it up there and take us through the next two verses here.
Yeah, so it starts off with a really interesting verb, anebe. So this means to go up. So it's always positive language when you go up. It's negative language when you go down. He goes up to the mountain. Interesting, he comes up into the ship. So just starts off with sort of positive language, like things are on the upswing here. The whole situation's turning around. Let's go back to the nocturnal demon sort of interpretation. Um, if that's true, I mean, they could have thought of themselves as crossing over to the land of the dead. Like, being shipwrecked and drowning is not far from the ancient mind, right? That you're on your way to the afterlife at this point. So, um, things are improving rapidly with the presence of Christ in the coming into the ship, and some say he climbs into the ship. Um, but however you look at it, uh, it's it's miraculous. I've said this before. It's a sign that he is the one of the few in history, even maybe even among the prophets. I don't know if there's any prophets except for Moses, possibly who can control the water and the wind and the sea and the rain. different, maybe Elijah can, pray for the rain to come or not to come. So certainly a prophet, but, much more likely that similar to the Spirit hovering over the waters of creation, God is the one who can still the waters, right? We see that imagery is also in Revelation, that that there's a sea that's just like glass, that there's placidity, there's peace, and this is language that you certainly want to pick up when you're reading the Psalms. Psalm 23, He leads me beside still waters. He restores my soul. So there's a peace which passes all understanding. He's the Prince of Peace. All of these, this is just pregnant with meaning, in a sense. And up to this point, the wind hadn't ceased. They were really in a bad way, or maybe it had subsided somewhat, and they weren't totally at the risk of shipwreck, but they were struggling, and now everything was turning around and going the right way. So, but they this word for amazement. I'm trying to look at the Greek here. Um, the wind ceased; they were sore amazed in themselves beyond measure. So usually in the Latin, it's the miracle when you're amazed that there is a sense that mirare. It's a wonder. It's a sign. It's a wonder that there's a wonderment to the amazement whenever something, and there's wonder as well. That there's a wonderment to the situation. They didn't wonder like, oh, I wonder what's going on here. It's that you're filled with awe. You're um, that God has done something, a mighty act, and that's what God does. That's His character. He's a God of wonders. He works wonders in the lives of men. So, and you can't get much grander. They've seen Jesus do it before, and just it never gets old, right? Seeing Jesus do wonderful things for man, to save his love and the saving grace that He brings wherever He goes. So that's what they're experiencing.
Okay, so David, you're welcome to pick up from there and say what you like. But one thing that I would like you to address is I can imagine that there would be those who are following through Mark with us, and they have some familiarity with the stories in the gospel and such. And they may have been anticipating that moment where Peter um, tries to walk on the water, yet we don't see that here. So are these two separate times, or what are we to make of that? So maybe address that a little bit, and then anything else you'd like to say about
Yeah.
51 and then 52.
It's this time that Peter does respond after Jesus says, "Be of good cheer, ego eime, be not afraid." I'm the one. I'm here. He in Matthew chapter 14, it records Peter saying, "If it is you, Christ, bid me to come walk to you." And he says, "Come." And Peter steps out and amazes. He's probably amazed at the fact that he is walking on the water. But it says, as he saw the tumult around him, it's still the stormy sea. That's when he lost faith and feared and began to sink and cries out, "Lord, save me." And Jesus takes him by the hand. And so when he goes up into the ship, he's bringing Peter with him uh, into the ship. So it is, I see it as the same event. And what is even astonishing here, as opposed to the other storm, is Jesus doesn't say anything. I mean, the storm is all around him while he's walking on the waters. It's still happening. The storm is happening while Peter comes out walking on the water, at least for the time that he uh, did. And then Jesus steps in the boat and it's calm. And that's part of what amazed them. That word amazed, Lucas was referencing it, is to amaze, to astonish, to be beside oneself, to be out of one's mind. It's they were out of their mind in fear, and now they're out of their mind in, what just happened, and it is just all calm. And so yeah, it was another demonstration of I control everything. Can't you see this? And I think verse 52 really ties much together about all this. Um, why would the disciples have to go through all this? Well, in verse 52, they didn't, apparently, they didn't consider the miracle of the loaves and its testimony to the deity and divinity of Christ. Their hearts were hardened. But this was an act that began to soften their heart towards who Jesus really was. Um, that's the way I derive this. For they considered not the miracle of the loaves, for their hearts were hardened.
So you're
Maybe they
suggesting
weren't
this,
caught up in being a king, or maybe they were so much caught up in being the king, they didn't think of it in terms of the demonstration of him
okay,
as divine.
right. So you're saying that this phrase, for they consider not the miracle of the loaves, was their failure to respond to that miracle in the, maybe not
Appropriately.
exactly to the same degree, but in a manner similar to how they responded to the miracle of Jesus walking on the water,
Yeah, they should
coming
have been
into the boat.
amazed at who he was then,
Yeah.
and they weren't.
Yeah.
And this
Well,
brought that out.
Okay.
I mentioned earlier that John also pairs these two stories in his gospel. And John chapter 6, coincidentally, or, by God's, sovereign appointment, is parallel to Mark 6 here. And Jesus says, I am the bread of life, right? John 6:48. And he says that also in another part of John, it's twice in that same gospel, he says, I am the bread of life. 48 and also 40 is it earlier as well.
Mhm.
Anyways, but he says that maybe it's later. So
35. Or,
35, okay,
I am
I'm
the
the
bread
bread
of
of
life.
life. So this is central to what Mark is talking about, but he doesn't line it up exactly in the same logical sense that John does. But I think it's instrumental to look at John to see that
Well,
Mark really wants us to see the centrality of Jesus as the bread. He's our portion. And I would even go so far as to say what Mark is saying here is because they didn't understand what Jesus was saying by feeding the people, like, in their early stages of ministry, they're probably looking at it, probably a lot like how pastors look at their congregations. These are just a bunch of people, you feed them, some of them are going away and being healed and going away, and they're not thankful that the 10 lepers, 9 go away, only one comes back and thanks Jesus. So sort of a bit of a callousness to ministry like that can happen. You can get there's a mixed multitude, and some people come back to feed more, and you can tell they're truly regenerate. And then there's those who don't. There's wheat and tares in the church, and so like maybe that's what he's talking about, that their hearts were hardened, that there was a little bit of a inability to see really what Jesus had accomplished by pointing out that he was a source of bread, a source of provision, a source of life. He is really Jehovah Jireh, like Abraham says on the mountain, God will provide. Don't worry, Isaac, God will provide. And so we can see that Jesus wants them to get it, like he's the source of life. He tells the woman at the Samaritan woman at the well, which John also picks up on, that Jesus is the source of life, of the water of life. So if Jesus is the rock that was in the wilderness where that water came out of, Jesus is the bread. then to live as Christ and to die as gain. Like, even if I'm dying in the middle of the Sea of Galilee, I have found the source of life. I have nothing to worry about. And I think that's essentially what he's saying in verse 52. Their hearts
Yeah.
were hardened. They hadn't really fully appreciated what Jesus was teaching with the loaves, that he's the bread. He's the
Yeah.
bread of life.
Right. So I'd like to explore then that phrase a little bit more, for their heart was hardened, because the to me the one circumstance or event that stands out in scripture of a heart being hardened is Pharaoh. And I don't think that this hardening is the same as the hardening of Pharaoh's heart um, with Moses. Um, I
Well, you
think
can see
it's
Gil's comment there, or blinded. They they didn't have the heart, or they didn't have the softness towards who Christ really was to really identify with the spiritual message that he was giving by feeding the 5,000. They didn't go beyond at best what the rest of the 5,000 men, the 20,000 people or whatever it was that were there, got out of it. That, hey, he's a supplier of our needs in the physical only. Let's make him our physical king. And so yeah, I still go back to, that's why this was going on. I think that John, he follows the same order of events, and coming up very rapidly after this is his Jesus teaching that really purges his followers on that he is the bread come down from heaven, and you do have to eat of him, and you do have to eat, eat his flesh and drink his blood. I believe that's what John 6 goes into, isn't it? And so yeah, there's quite a lesson about understanding him as the true bread from heaven
Yeah,
for
many
us.
disciples turn back at the end of John
Yeah.
6.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, there's a certain sanctification process. I think it's proper to understand. Instead of saying, I think there was a point in my life when I said, the disciples, they were real numbskulls. They didn't really get it, and over and over again, we see these situations. Well, we're real numbskulls too. Like we may be regenerate, we may be Christians, but we have a process of softening, and that's what God promises in Ezekiel 36, that I will replace your heart of stone with a heart of flesh. And there is a process of softening our hearts. We in our sin we sear our consciences, and God, through trials in our lives, He softens our hearts. He makes us cry out to Him. He even challenges our misunderstandings about the nature of the world, maybe even the spiritual world. We see devils and demons and trials of suffering that are beyond what we want to suffer. And Jesus says, well, you should be looking at me. You should be seeing me in your trials, um, not the worst case scenario. I think that there's just a very clear exposition here in Mark, which is going to intensify in the next few chapters, so, especially 8 through 10. The disciples are going to be really challenged because he's going to foretell his going to Jerusalem. They're not going to like it. And so he's really working on their maturity. And in German they talk about the Bildungsroman, the coming of age story, right? And so this is a bit of a coming of age story where these men have to come of age to become the leaders of the church, the men who will carry forth the gospel. And there's a lot of worldliness that needs to be sort of chipped away, and they need to be prepared. So this is a great preparation. What's going on here?
so yeah, Gil, I think, is appropriately blunt here and can be helpful to our own thinking of things about our own um, journey or life, Christian life, right? He says here, for their heart was hardened or blinded, not by sin or against Christ, much less in a judicial way, but there was a great deal of dullness and stupidity and want of attention in them. And that, that phrase right there, it might be helpful to keep that in mind as a humbling descriptor, right? That, as much progress as hopefully each of us have made in our Christian life and character and understanding, let's not forget that, there's probably still a great deal of dullness and stupidity and want of attention in us. And we need Christ to be um, doing what he did here and giving us kind of a makeup assignment, right? We missed it on the first assignment with the miracle of the feeding of the 5,000, and Jesus was gracious enough to give us a makeup assignment that we could be successful, right? And we could improve our grade, so to speak. But yeah, I thought that was maybe appropriately blunt for us there. Okay, taking this then section as a whole, because I think we're at a point where we want to wrap up our podcast for this evening. David, any final comments you want to say, kind of in summary of what we see here in the Jesus walking on the water miracle? And
Well, I think a few of the things that Lucas pointed out on, the spiritual lesson here, certainly we don't want to miss. I mean, the physical activities are just astounding, as it was for these disciples, but um, in the scheme of things, in terms of their application to us, um, we want to learn from this. And in those trials that seem like we're getting nowhere and we feel like Jesus is not there, it's untrue. He sees us in all of our trials. He was God. He could see from the mountain, whether it was physical or spiritual, and God sees our needs at all times. And we need to be willing to cry out earlier in our trials for the help from Him, because He is there and He will show His glory to us through it. These trials, we got to realize, come for many a reason. They range all the way from what we see here, waking them up, softening their hearts, opening their eyes to the full glory of Christ, strengthening them in their walk, to other places. Paul says, you go through trials because you need to be equipped to be with someone else who's going through the trial. So God has such multifaceted purposes for what He's doing in the world, but it's always for not just our edification personally, but for the edification of His body, His church as a whole. And so sometimes we get a little too nearsighted and focused in our trial as it's just all about me, but it's not. It's about you and about your role in the church, and it's about God's purposes for His kingdom. Always, all those aspects are operating.
Yeah,
Lucas, any summary you would like to give?
two things. One thing I think that's good about the prayer walk to the top of the mountain, kind of touching on what David just said, is that sometimes we get caught up in our own personal, maybe spiritual lives. We lose the big picture of who the great God we serve, and then the great wonders and great works. And probably these men had the same thing. It's like they were looking at themselves in their own little sort of microcosm of where we are in our little storms. But that when you go up on top of a mountain, you see the whole world, and you realize God is sovereign over all of this. If where we live in a metro area. You go up on Bogus Basin or Table Rock, and you look out over the valley, and you just see hundreds of thousands of houses, and you realize God is sovereign over all this stuff. When I'm down inside that house, I might be overwhelmed by whatever tempests are churning, but God is sovereign over all of this, and I can rest um, by walking in faith, not by sight. And I think that's going to be a big one for the disciples. And when you hear Jesus criticize their faith, you have little faith, or in the case of Peter, walking on the water, not which doesn't happen here, but but certainly that comes back to our mind, like, oh well, you could walk on water if you had more faith. Well, let's just say that you could walk with God, right? Let's say we could walk with God if you walk by faith. You can walk with God with like assurance, without living in terror. You can overcome all these obstacles in life if you walk by faith. The modern attack on faith is well orchestrated by the devil, because faith is that instrument of salvation that God would have us use every day to grasp onto Christ. And I never get tired of talking about faith. It's counterintuitive for our day and age, because we, we're ridiculed if we want to see everything in the light of God's truth and goodness. But what other way is there to see? What are the other ways there to see? It's uh, the darkness is and the terrors of the world is all there is to see if you can't see in the spectrum of God's goodness and His truth. So
All right. Um, I was expecting us to get farther tonight, but there's as you read through what is probably often in our minds, just that story of Jesus walking on the water, getting in the boat, everything calms down, everybody's okay. And yet, as Mark presents the story, there is so much substance there, right? Every verse along the way, we were finding things of value to consider and contemplate, and those things that shore up our faith and such. So, yeah, I really appreciate um, our exploration of those verses tonight, and I hope those who watch our video have the same appreciation and see that as an example of not just skimming by what can seem to be a relatively simple verse that just has a simple statement, but that there is great truth in those things. So hopefully you found that as you watched our exploration into a sketchbook of Christ tonight. Please leave a comment if you did, and a comment of what things that you saw in these scriptures, or what questions you might have that we can address in a future podcast. Do join us again next week as we continue our quest through the Gospel of Mark, doing our best to understand who this man Jesus is. And all of us, we need to make a decision about what we're going to think about this man and what are we going to do with this man. It's critical for our life now and for eternity. So please do like the video, share the video, all those YouTube things. We'd love to have more and more people view our videos and provide us with comments and questions, and that would just make it all the more full and interactive as we continue. So thanks for being a part of the video, and we hope that you continue with us next week with our